I'm Alex, and this is going to be a quick rundown of all the books I bought / acquired in January. There's kind of logic and reason behind all of it, so I'm going to try and convey that. But in essence, this is a January book haul, and without further ado, on to the first book. So the first book is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, and I got it primarily just because it's a classic. It's one of the giants of French literature, which I'm not too familiar with. I've read a few French books, mainly Ionesco and then sort of Le Petit Prince, but this is the first, I suppose, French novel that I've read. And then it sort of sparked other reads that I wanted to pursue. So the first set of reads, I suppose, which came from it were primarily focused on the philosophy of Les Miserables, which focuses on the Rousseau and Hobbes debate. And I'm vaguely aware of that, on the nature of man, where Rousseau is suggesting that man is corrupted by society and starts off pure, whereas Hobbes is suggesting that man is a beast who is to an extent civilized or tamed by society. And while I have that surface level idea, and from that know where I stand on it, I wanted to get a better understanding. So because of that, I got Of the Social Contract by Rousseau and Leviathan by Hobbes, which are the two main books where they delve into their philosophies on the nature of man. In addition to those two books, inspired, let's say, by Les Miserables, was the suggestion of paladins that they touched upon, and medieval era knights and chivalry, which is something which has always interested me. The Templar Knights, even to an extent the myths of King Arthur, have big appeal to me. I like the idea of chivalry, of to the Knight's Code, and I wanted to explore it further in terms of the French perspective, let's say, and the Knights of Charlemagne, i.e. the Paladins. Because of that, I decided to buy the Song of Roland, which is a primary source material, or the most well-known source material on the Paladins that still remains today. And so I wanted to get a further idea of this concept of the French notions of chivalry. So that is where the Song of Roland came from, also inspired by Les Miserables. The final book that stemmed from Les Miserables was Waterloo by Andrew Roberts, which is an account of the Battle of Waterloo and Napoleon's unfortunate, the final curtain for Napoleon's reign of terror, perhaps, on Europe. I'd previously read Andrew Roberts' biography of Napoleon the Great, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I thought it gave a great account, and as I was looking for a description of Waterloo, and I saw that Andrew Roberts had written one, it was a fairly easy buy, and I was quite confident that it would be good, and it was. I've only just recently finished reading it, but it was a good overview, busted some of the myths that Victor Hugo had put forward in his exposition of the Battle of Waterloo within Les Miserables, which was always good to do, and I'm a big fan of the era, so it was nice to have a copy of that, one to read, and a starting point to explore more accounts of Waterloo, and also a bigger picture of the Napoleonic Wars as well. The second, as it were, category of books that I bought this month are stemming from comments that I've had on videos. So the first book, or the first set of comments that came to that, are from Cliff's Dark Gems, who is another channel on YouTube who makes videos on horror books. I'll link his channel in the description. Well, I've been wanting to read horror for a while, classical horror. I suppose really I've read Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I suppose can be considered classical horror, and Dracula back in school. But aside from that, it's very limited. Although I have constantly seen horror books that I wanted to read and just never got around to it. So I thought, this is a month, catalysed by Cliff's comments, I might as well do it. So I bought two books related to horror. First was a copy of Dracula to reread it and see what I think of it at the moment. I remember enjoying it at school, but I don't think I ever really fell in love with any books that I read at school. There was always a slight, aversion to it. And it was only until rereading books that I read at school that I really fell in love with them. For example, 1984 and Frankenstein. So we'll see how that goes with Dracula. I do have some, obviously I know the plot, and I have some memory of certain scenes. I suppose it was also part of the process of buying the Penguin Clothbound Classics and filling the collection of them. The second horror book is The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe, who's an author I have heard a lot about and always intended to read but never really have. So I thought that this was a good starting point. It's also nice to have smaller books just to have something which is pocket sized and can be easily read. And yeah, looking forward to reading it and getting a first taste of Edgar Allan Poe. The third book related to a comment was Britt-Marie was here. And actually, I know nothing about it, but someone said it was their favourite book of 2022. That was good enough for me to go out and read it. I suppose it's also somewhat modern fiction, which is something I'm trying to read more of, so there's that. I know it's been made into a film. I know that because it kept coming up when I was looking to buy the book. My mother seemed to have heard of it, at least the general plot. So, don't know, going in pretty much blind into this, but looking forward to it and hopefully get around to it soon as well, because it is nice to just read sort of random fiction, aside from the more intentional reading that I generally do. Speaking of more intentional reading and my reading goals for 2023, if you want to see what they are, then videos in the description. I bought 2 books by Plato. The first is Protagoras and Meno, and the second is Gorgias. They're 2 more Socratic dialogues to go on with the rest of Plato that I already own. It really was just to get an idea of the classical philosophers, and Plato was my starting point. Probably after that move on to Aristotle, look at the works of Homer and Virgil, and then really branch out from there. I'm not too sure where I want to go next, but that's why I bought those 2 books. There's more Plato that I still want to buy, have all the dialogues, read through them, get a big picture, probably make a video on Plato as a whole, just sort of understanding the Socratic philosophies that he put forward and their relevance. In keeping with the broad idea of classical philosophy, I also bought a copy of St. Thomas Aquinas on politics and ethics. I bought it as theology is not an area that I've really ever delved into. I suppose I've read Mircea Eliade's History of Religion and obviously have an awareness of the biblical text as well and the theological ideas that they present, but I haven't really read from any theologians, and St. Thomas Aquinas is one who comes up a lot, particularly in relation to Catholicism, the Roman Catholic Church. So it's one that I just wanted to get an idea of. Coincidentally, I was also given a copy of The End of Faith by Sam Harris, a well-known atheist. And I didn't actually, realise that before sort of thinking about the books that I bought in January, but it's quite nice to have St. Thomas Aquinas alongside Sam Harris to provide a nice dialectic, I suppose, and hold those 2 ideas in contrast to each other. So I'll probably read them back to back, similarly to what I'll do with Rousseau and Hobbes. And I think it's always good if you can to have 2 opposing perspectives being read at the same time, because it's very easy to read a book which argues a point, especially if it's written well, and then just think, oh yeah, that's a great point. I totally agree with everything they said. Then sometime later you'll read a book that disagrees and you'll shift again because you've been presented with a compelling argument. So I think it can be more beneficial to have them both at the same time and then really be able to go through it and make up your mind. And that's what I hope to do with those 2 sets of opposing books. The next overall theme, and I suppose still in keeping with the intentionality idea, are books in Italian, as that is the language that I'm currently learning, and I always like to get to a good level of vocabulary. So let's say with Italian I've learned about 400 words. Just overview how to learn languages, learn vocabulary based on a frequency list, and then get into reading and consuming media as soon as possible. So podcasts, YouTube videos, whatever. And so, with Italian, with already a basis in Spanish and French, it's pretty easy to then pick up with only 400 words, able to read. Well, so the first book is the first Harry Potter book, and it's pretty comfortable, even though I've only learned about 400, 500 words in the language, as I have that basis in other Romance languages. So, when you have a base in the language families, it's obviously easy to learn the next language. So, yeah, small aside. But anyway, so that's the first book that I bought in Italian for this month. Second, and I apologise for any butchering of pronunciation, is Il Gattopardo by Tomasi di Lampedusa. Bought that book for no other reason. They seem to come up quite frequently in suggestions of what the best Italian works were. So I bought that. I don't know how difficult it's going to be. I don't tend to like to buy books which are targeted towards language learners as they're just not interesting. I want to read a great book because then I know I'll be interested and want to keep reading and be willing to push through and struggle through, as opposed to a text which is quite plain but perhaps easier and more conducive to learning the language. But that's just my preference on that. And you'll see that particularly with the next book, which I did intentionally go looking for, is La Divina Commedia by Dante. Is this a book that I would recommend for language learners? No, but it is a book that I've long wanted to read. And I do try to read books in their original language. And I know this isn't Latin, but it's close, and I'm not there for Latin yet. And I know that I also didn't read Les Miserables in French, but I didn't really want to read a 1,200-page book in French. So we'll see how Dante goes. I think it should be okay, as it's got quite short sections. In the poetry, it's broken up quite nicely into manageable chunks. However, it is also written as poetry, which makes it harder. And I don't know how archaic the Italian will be, but we'll see. Maybe not the smartest idea, but I like a challenge, and we'll see how it goes. Next is Fango, which is a more contemporary book, I suppose, because after buying La Divina Commedia, I did want to have an assurance that the next book that I was buying would be more modern in the Italian that was in it, and that I wouldn't be learning purely from Dante, and then when speaking Italian, sound like I've just walked out of the Renaissance. So that was my thinking behind this. Know nothing about it, know nothing about the author, but sometimes it's good to read books blind. And finally, just a few books which don't fit into any category really. So first is Ulysses by James Joyce. Bought that because it's classic, one that I've had my eye on for a while. I'm not sure when I'm going to get around to reading it, hopefully sometime this year, but yeah, who knows. I don't know if I should read the Odyssey first. That's the other thing that I haven't quite worked out. So I probably will read the Odyssey first. I like to read things somewhat in order, especially if they've been hugely influenced by other works. The next book is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This was a gift, also in English, not in French. Another long book that, well, to be honest, it was a gift, so I don't really have a say over the language, but I probably have chosen it in English anyway. And finally, another gift, Other Lands by Thomas Halliday. And I don't really know anything about the book. I know that it's based on natural sciences and natural history, which are areas that interest me. I mean, there are not a lot of areas which don't interest me, to be honest. I do like to read quite broadly. So it's a book that I'm looking forward to read. Not a topic that I'm very familiar with, but exciting nonetheless. And that about wraps it up for what I got in January. Let me know if you picked up anything in January that you're pretty excited to read. If there's anything on my list that you have read and any insights you want to give me before I read them, then please do leave that below. Otherwise, that's that, and I will see you in the next one.